Every generation grows up reacting to the one before it. The so-called greatest generation came of age during the Great Depression. Survival wasn't theoretical. You worked wherever work existed. You chose stability over fulfillment because stability meant food. Then they fought a world war, defeated fascism, and came home to a country that treated them like heroes. The 1950s weren't perfect, far from it, but they were coherent. There was a story about effort, reward, and belonging. Their children grew up inside that story and saw its cracks. They saw the racism, the sexism, the exclusions baked into that prosperity. They went to college in greater numbers than any generation before them and used education as a tool of critique. They protested war. They questioned authority. They rejected the moral certainty their parents seemed so comfortable with. And then, slowly, many of them re-embraced the system, not out of hypocrisy, but exhaustion. Careers, houses, status symbols replaced protest. Work became about profit again. The fancy cars came back. Generation X, my generation, grew up in the aftermath of all that. We were the first children of two working parents. We let ourselves in after school. We learned independence early, not because it was a philosophy, but because no one was home. Structure was thin. Guidance was abstract. What we were told over and over was simple and well-intentioned. Find what you're passionate about. Do that. It sounded humane. It sounded liberating. It sounded like progress. But it quietly shifted risk from society and onto the individual. We were asked to make existentially sound choices at 18, without mentorship, without safety nets, and without honest information about how economies actually work. Passion replaced apprenticeship. Fulfillment replaced stability. And when it didn't work, the failure was framed as personal. If you didn't succeed, you just hadn't wanted it badly enough. Now our children are growing up in a world that we never prepared them for. The economy is unstable. The planet is visibly strained. Institutions no longer pretend to protect the people who play by the rules. We hover because we're afraid. We overprotect because we know how little margin for error exists. And we tell them to follow their passions while knowing, deep down, the passion no longer pays the rent. Generation X carries a specific trauma. We were raised to be emotionally self-sufficient in a system that requires collective support, and then blamed when we couldn't build it on our own. We weren't lazy. We weren't naive. We were given a beautiful idea without the scaffolding to survive it. And now we're trying, imperfectly, anxiously, to figure out how to tell the next generation the truth without crushing them. There's one more part of this story that's harder to talk about, especially if you're teaching right now. The generation I see in front of me every day is often described as unmotivated or disengaged, but that language misses what's actually happening. They are anxious, not in a vague way, but in a constant background hum that never turns off. Many of them have never known a world without screens, metrics, notifications, or the pressure to be visible and evaluated at all times. Attention isn't something they lack, it's something that's been fragmented. When every quiet moment is filled, when boredom is eliminated, when social life, entertainment, and validation all live inside the same device, it becomes very hard to develop patience, curiosity, or sustained focus. Not because they're incapable, but because those muscles rarely get exercised. What looks like apathy is often overstimulation mixed with fear. They've grown up hearing that the future is unstable, that the economy is unforgiving, that the planet is warming, and that any misstep will live forever online. At the same time, they're told to be exceptional, adaptable, passionate, and entrepreneurial without being given meaningful control over their circumstances. Retreating into screens isn't laziness, it's shelter. And the tragedy is that many of them do want meaning. They just don't trust institutions or adults to help them find it. So they stay where the rules are clear, the rewards are immediate, and the risk feels lower. If earlier generations were taught to endure, and mine was taught to follow our passion, this generation has been taught to cope. Understanding that doesn't solve the problem, but it does change how we see them. Not as indifferent, but as overwhelmed. Not as empty, but as overloaded.